the titular leader, irrelevant who they are, gets grabbed from behind by the leader, the person who is going to say, we're doing a conga, everybody get on board, this is what is happening at this party.
It's only a conga once the person behind has decided it's a conga.
Actually, it's only a conga when the third person joins.
Today, we're lucky to be joined by Hannah Blom-Cooper, who is a civil fraud lawyer and a partner of law firm Greenberg Traurig, having previously spent her professional career at Mishcon de Reya, where she reached the level of partner. Hannah is a highly experienced commercial litigator, representing both individuals and corporations, focusing on disputes arising from business failure and formal insolvency processes. Hannah is often the first person contacted by clients who have been made aware of an action against them. The cases that Hannah works will often involve huge reputational risk, which justifies mounting a defense. And today, we're going to hear about what it's like being in a team in a law firm.
Well, first of all, at my level of experience in terms of the type of work I do and the level that I work at, we generally don't get to stand up in court at all. Solicitors hand their cases over at key points in the process to the barristers. So we are, some people say back office, some people say the brains behind the machine or whatever, but solicitors generally are office-based, building cases, liaising with clients, working the financial side of all the cases that we work on, and the advocacy, which is the standing in front of the judge and arguing the rumpole of the Old Bailey or suits for some, is usually done by barristers who are specialists in that area. And the weirdness of why we've got a split profession goes back to, the courts of the king, when there was a very different environment in which lawyers operated and who could touch the king and who could talk on behalf of the king. So we have that funny split profession. My life does end up in court in terms of work for client quite often, but it's very rare. Something bad has gone wrong if I have to speak to a judge in an open court.
So in court, a barrister is part of your team, but that's not the job that you're doing.
So a barrister is separate, as I said, is a completely separate profession, and is a much more lonely, as my experience of it, is a much more lonely existence. They are generally self-employed. They may operate rather than operate within chambers, which is like a kind of a collective, a we work for the legal profession. But they are self-employed, and it's extremely important that they have complete independence and autonomy, because when they stand up in court, they are literally the mouthpiece of an individual client. So they could be standing up against the person who shares the room next to them, but they will have had no contact whatsoever. There's nothing about their financial, reward that has any bearing on the person who's standing next to them, even if they share the same work environment. So that's very important, and having that kind of independence when you've come to the level of the cases we're on, and presenting cases to judges where there's a lot riding on it for our clients. It's very important to be having that specialist advocate who has that independence of mind. But yeah, we do form teams with them, as with pretty much everybody around us in our space as well.
So Hannah, I think you've given us a really good view of that, the stereotypical thing we all see in the movies, the courtroom dramas and things, and that's where the advocacy happens on behalf of your clients. But you're an insolvency lawyer, so it would be really helpful to understand, if I'm in business and I'm about to go insolvent, or something catastrophic has happened, and unfortunately I have to get in touch with someone like you. What happens? What's the process that you're involved in? What does that look like?
The kind of legal area of insolvency covers both what is my area of work, which is the litigation, the contentious work where there's a dispute arising out of an insolvency, which is very common. There's a whole nother side to insolvency, which is maybe where, in terms of the media, we get a bit more of it if we're talking about a massive corporate failure like Cohesion, if you remember that, where, the bottom has dropped out of a business for one reason or another. But actually what happens is that then, the lawyers swarm in, or the finances swarm in, and they pick off the business and they restructure it in a way that gives the best outcome for the usually for the creditors of that company. That is an entirely different beast to what I do. They like Venn diagram at certain points, which I'll give you an example of. But actually, that is so insolvency as a term is a bit dangerous in terms of saying that's what I do. So I won't get called in terms of my side of the work. I won't get called by a business which is teetering on insolvency. Usually that will be somebody else in my firm that would say, we're having a financial problem. We look, our banks are breathing down our neck. We need to do something about this. And then they'll have a different kind of legal journey to go on. But where it does come into my domain, and I can give you an example of a case I've working on it at the moment, is what happened was there was an insolvency in the past, and they then had liquidators were appointed over the company. The assets were all, sold off basically, and the liquidators were then left with a massive shortfall in terms of what was available for the creditors of the company. Then you get the call, and that's when all the fun starts in terms of the building the client team, building the case, working out the direction of travel for the client, most importantly in the early stages, but then also working out the economies of it for the firm and in this case we also have an insurer who is assisting with our fees, so we have to work out the economies with the insurer as well.
So the red phone has rung, and there's an urgent situation that this individual has found themselves in. What do? You said you've got to put the team together. So you're now assembling a team that has to attend to this specific urgent problem, and presumably you're on the clock.
So, well, first of all, I mean, this is really dull, but the actual first.
If you think it's dull, we probably think it's interesting. So go for it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say a word which is going to make you think it is dull, which is regulation. We
Right.
are highly, highly regulated business. Every single step, and particularly the first interactions with a new client, are. I mean, I haven't worked in another regulated business, so I can't speak, but I believe must be one of the highly regulated. We're the only profession, I believe, that has an actual act named after. There's a Solicitors Act. But apart from that, there's all, lots of regulation in terms of our onboarding clients is obviously what people have to do, all sorts of business. So there's a process of working out whether there's any potential conflict across the business. So is there any part of the insolvent business that we had previously touched that means that we are forbidden from taking on this client? And that's actually quite a difficulty in itself. And that involves, reaching into the teams in the back office of our firm. And then there's a whole load of, money laundering regulations, and then, terms and whatever, and with the insurer as well, all of that. So before you get to feeling out your team, and you're doing that at the same time, though, these two things are running along. And yes, you're expending a lot of time on it, but it's pretty much all contingent. You are not on the clock. You are not raking it in on day one. You are trying to work out whether you can actually act. And that's actually quite a complex process.
So that's interesting in itself, that you're working in a kind of contingent fashion, that, right, I need to assemble a team for a provisional client who I might have a conflict of interest with, therefore can't represent. And so that's got a lot of uncertainty attached to it. And you if the checks and balances come out with a green light, it's go, isn't it? It's right. We need to start sprinting.
And in the instance that I was describing to you, we did have time. We had time in order to do that. But on many other cases, we are subject to what's called a freezing order, which is our client is immediately unable to touch any of their assets, immediately unable to even probably access bank accounts, has to disclose all of their assets in a very short period of time, and return to court immediately. So all of that has to be then, all of the description I was giving you about the onboarding has to be truncated and done in very short order. Building the team has to be done literally overnight, because you need people to be covering off several different aspects of what's going to be required in the coming days. And one of the biggest issues in the very early stages of a freezing order is that probably the client has received upwards of 4,000 pages of documents in order to obtain the freezing order, and they all have to be kind of absorbed by the team to work out where it's going.
You have this urgent matter that's been raised. You have a team that potentially has already started work to understand whether you can act on behalf of the client. And maybe moving forward to that point where you have decided that you can act, you now have to put a team together. I'm really interested in how you go about that, because I assume those people are potentially working on other cases. You have to figure out who is the right person at the right stage of their career with the right skills, the right experience to work on this. And there are different roles to fill. Could you walk us through how you go about finding the talent, what the size of the team is? How do you understand whether they're going to be a good fit for the team?
Within that process, I have a rule of thumb, which is that if you are a person who likes to, and you don't necessarily get to establish this on day one or in the process of recruitment, but if you're a person who likes to have a to-do list at the beginning of your day and at the end of the day have more or less ticked off that to-do list and it more or less looked like what you were expecting when you started, then this type of litigation is definitely not for you, because most of my to-do lists, the shape of them change every day, and some days quite dramatically. And I get huge amounts of energy from that. And if people, whether they're introvert or extrovert, get energy from the change that happens because your day has been interrupted by somebody coming into, literally standing in the doorway and saying, "This has happened. I need you to drop what you're doing and do this. Can you do that?" And now, also trying to build teams when some people might physically not actually be in the office, which is a bit of a obstacle and sometimes to being able to access that kind of conversation. If you can see what happens, I walk into someone's doorway when I've got that sort of situation and I say, "This has happened, have you got the capacity?" And if their face lights up, they are a litigator, and if their face drops, they are probably an excellent at other things, but they're not intrinsically, what I would say, it's very crude, but intrinsically a litigator, because you have to enjoy the fact that something's going to happen left field and someone's going to want you to drop what you're doing and ask you to balance everything else in your life.
How do you know which doors to knock on? Is there a pool of people? How do you find talent inside the organisation?
We're in an office in London of 145 persons. About 40 of those are operating within litigation, our litigation team, and I'm talking 40 lawyers. There are support staff as well. And within that 40 lawyers, there are some specialisms whose background and expertise will just not be able to be transferable into the cases that we've been talking about. So they are excluded basically and automatically because of that lack of expertise. So we have a white collar crime team. Crime as an area of litigation is completely specialist. I wouldn't be able to. In fact, I've tried and I've been massively found out. So I wouldn't be able to do it. And likewise, colleagues in the who are operating that space wouldn't be able to do the civil work necessarily. Some people can cross over, but it's very rare at our level. So there are some people who self-select and they're not available for the type of task that we're talking about. Then there is, within the rest of it, there are obviously, I have people who I've worked with who are tried and tested, who, if we're talking about crisis team building, who are going to be my first port of call. And fortunately for me, that list is quite long because most people are much better than I am at my job. And so I can go to, probably 7 or 8 people who I am confident that I can rely on and can trust, which is a huge part of that, day one stuff. And then there'll be another list who I don't know have as much familiarity with, who I would really like to work with, but I don't know so well, that in certain situations which are not crisis point, you can call on them and have that experience and build that relationship. But they are definitely in a second tier, if you like. And sometimes you have to dip into the second tier because the first tier are caught up in other things. So it is a little bit of each situation is different, but basically it's about, the relationships that you've formed with the people, because most of what we need is to be able to work well with people. I think for all of the people in my team, they've all got the capacity to work on the cases that I'm doing, and to do it very well. So it's not about skill set as much as their softer skills, probably.
So there's an internal Rolodex, and there's obviously this really interesting thing that you have probably a much wider long-lived team, which is the firm that you're working in, and you have probably worked with those people on this project. So it'll be a case, but there is something with the beginning and an end, and establish some familiarity with them and a working relationship with them, and then they need to be made available to come and work in this team that you're working on. Do people work multiple cases at once? So is this team, are these people members of multiple teams all at once? So they'll be working with you on a case and working with someone else on a case.
And you're going straight to the most fractious part of it, what it is like to work in a litigation team, which is that I like to think that I'm in a very flat organization. That's not true. It's quite hierarchical, and because of the regulated aspect of it, everything has to go through it. It's like this very, very thin funnel at the very top of it, because it has to go through the partner and out. So any product that goes out of this firm goes out with my name on it in terms of my cases. So obviously there are lots of funnels, because there are, in my bit of the business, there are 5 partners doing so, creating all of those tunnels. So lots of teams feeding in, lots of different cases going out through one person. And in order to be able to maintain the level that we want, the business size of the business, and attract the work and whatever, we have to run lots of different cases into those funnels. And so therefore, if you think about the team below the partner, they are going to be working on more than one case for different partners. And this is where the friction lies, because it's very hard at any point in time to say my cause is more important than your cause, but sometimes we have to do that. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But I am, within my partnership team, I've got the most incredible relationships with the 5 for a very specific reason. And that conversation for me with any of those is that probably to our clients is the most valuable, because I can say, no, really, do you need this person today? Can I have their time for this or whatever like that? And they're quickly in and out conversations, and they don't create friction, but they are areas of friction in businesses like ours, and were very present in my previous firm, just because there was more people actually doing the kind of work that I was doing, so probably more instances where it could be friction. But yeah, it is. It's very strange. So there are, we're in competition with each other for the resource that we have available to us. And there's always a tension between recruiting and the possibility that we have, which is present for all lawyers who work on the solicitor side, which is clients have no obligation to instruct us. They can go to another firm at any point in time. So you can be suddenly, the clients, for whatever reason, case settles, excellent. Client gets fed up with fees, not so great. Client gets, fed up with their lawyers or the case or whatever, and disappears, and suddenly, you're over-resourced. So there's always that balance. But having that relationship at partner level is, as I say, probably the most valuable thing I offer to clients, even though they have no idea.
So there's an internal market almost around about time and attention on caseloads, and there's obviously an important team dynamic among the partners that sets the rhythms for the activity of the firm as a whole.
You described it much better than I was describing it. It's a marketplace and it's a rhythm. It's just exactly. And I mean, in terms of tools that we use, we have a capacity tool, and the resource that we have in the team. I don't like saying the word resource because they're all individuals, but our solicitors are inputting into that, what their capacity is. But as I say, the litigation 101 rule is that it changes as 9 o'clock does not look the same as 3 o'clock. So your capacity changes, and the ability to update that is not a sufficiently up-to-date tool that it has any real use apart from a guide as to who's got availability and what cases they're working on. the best one is, conversations as soon as the moment arises.
You've got this marketplace, you've got different clients with, and you're assembling different teams, but presumably you also have to think, how do I'm going to use the word price. I don't literally mean price, but how do I price up that particular case in a way that means that we'll actually do a good job, and that, that person or that group of people are not so overstretched just so you can service the client?
Well, it is literally price as well, Andrew, because we charge as litigators, we're charging by the hour, and each fee earner has a rate at which they are working on these cases. So there is a price element to it. So you're not only are you doing have you got the capacity, and have you genuinely got the capacity in terms of other things that might be going on, but also what level are you at in terms of your pricing, and is that the right level of experience for the case, and do we need two of you, and that's the pricing aspect is absolutely key. So I might like to think that there's my go-to 12-year qualified lawyer for a case that is quite tight on budget. I've not got access to them.
Right.
I
Because they're
have
too
to,
expensive.
they're too expensive, and we can't justify it for the client.
I'm not a football person, but it makes me think of, like, your Premier League footballers. This is what such and such earns a week, and that adds a value. It also, whether you like it or not, it imposes a degree of stratification into the team.
I think by its very nature, it imposes stratification. Exactly. And so as I say, I like to think that, it's quite egalitarian, and we, consult when we're doing, when we have team meetings, everybody's voice should be heard, because actually no one has the monopoly on what's a good idea or not in our space. If you've come this far in terms of your career, you've definitely got to the point at which your view is valuable. But the reality is there is a hierarchy, and there's that, and I said to you, this falls through this funnel, which is that everything has to come through me. So it usually, on the bigger cases, will be drafted by the document we're talking about, drafted by the most junior, but it'll pass through the hands of somebody else who will input, and then it'll come to me as a fairly finished product.
Yeah, it creates its own form of hierarchy through which the materials that you're working on pass. I'm just thinking, if I was a mid-level lawyer, I'd really want to be able to trust the junior lawyers beneath me to do a really good job, so that when it came to me, I wasn't having to pick up the slack.
But I think the trust works all the way up, and also all the way back down again as well. And the very essence, as I said to you, our clients, are any moment. It's not like a contract that they can not, that they have to serve termination notice on. They literally, they're here and then they're gone. So more importantly, I think sometimes than the actual product that you deliver, is that they have 100% confidence in what you're doing. Obviously, 100% is maybe unachievable, but that trust element. So when I'm teaching more junior lawyers, I said, you have to command trust, and you do it in the teeniest ways with clients. It's not about you went to a hearing and you won the day, and so then they now think you're a genius, and you're going to be the person who's win the case, because nobody can guarantee that. But what you can affect is, that you communicate the tiniest details about what they're going to be charged. And if that changes, you tell them that's going to change. And it might only change by £50, but you tell them that's going to change by £50, because it's those micro discussions you have with your client, or those micro interactions which you have with your client, which builds the trust. And the interesting thing for me is that when you do that well with a client, that bleeds into the team.
You have a relationship with the client, but you have a relationship with them. You have a relationship with the team. To what extent is the client feeling like part of the team that's working on this?
It's a really good question. Different clients, different levels of integration with the team. So I do quite a lot of work. So when I was describing to you the scenario in which I'm acting for a director who's facing claims from liquidators, I've also do currently acting for liquidators. Now they're accountants who are licensed to take up appointments as liquidators or administrators or whatever they are doing, but they are professionals. their life in terms of the day-to-day of it looks very much like mine in terms of their office-based existence, team building, client-facing, all of those sorts of things. And when I'm acting for that kind of client, it's very much like we are sitting side by side in the process. The kind of level of telepathy is quite high. You don't need to say certain things. You don't need to communicate. You don't need to manage expectations in quite the same way because they understand the whole process. They've probably been through it many times with many different lawyers, but also they're just because of their they come from professional service background. So that is a kind of quality of team that is that even though it's a client, it's much more like somebody who's inside your own business. Then there'll be I have a client who's a lawyer. He's not a litigator, but he's somebody who has a background similar to mine, and so therefore his level of involvement in some of what I'm doing is quite high. And then there'll be other clients who are from a completely different world in terms of their background and don't have any of the same experiences of clients at the moment, who I've realized that I am not, they're not in a team with me. It's very much more like as I say, a more transactional relationship. And I've realized I need to build up levels of communication with this particular client, and that they need a lot more from me in terms of filling in what's happening in the background, because they just don't get it. It's very foreign to them. So I guess those are 3 examples of where there's different types of team relationships with clients. But yes, you do form a team. And also the other thing is, I think that even though this is generally around business, most of the cases that I'm involved in, whether it is for a claimant who is seeking a recovery or from a defendant who is potentially lights out in terms of their financial means, they're probably at one of the worst stages of their professional or work business lives. It's not pleasant being involved in litigation. So you get exposed to some bits of emotion and some bits of vulnerability and some bits of quite irrational behavior, which is totally understandable because it's fierce. It's not nice. It's very unpleasant sometimes.
When you were describing the bringing the team together and the nature of the work, the fact that for people that are high on this conscientiousness scale, they won't get their very disciplined day, something popped in my head. It's not a term that I love using, which is something called VUCA, which is another acronym, because business loves an acronym, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Yep. And that's sort of effectively an acknowledgement that in certain situations, and I think maybe it was Stanley McChrystal that really popularized this. He had a book called Team of Teams about how the US military, particularly special forces, adapted from a situation where warfare was almost play by numbers. You win through superior planning, supply chain, operations, logistics, information. And then that completely changed with the war on terror, because they moved into this state where it was incredibly volatile, and so teams had to be put together differently. And it's really interesting how you described that in this very specific area of law that you act in, things change.
So one of the challenges of my work is that if you've been a client of a law firm in a happier times, you've bought a business or you've bought a property, or you've been involved in a raising money or something like that, and you've had to use lawyers, that is quite a different experience that you then have if you then have to come across and instruct a litigator. And you might in your nice pleasant building business relationship with a lawyer have been able to agree a fixed fee for your work, where you can say, this is the project we're going to be involved in and this is what it's going to cost. And in fact, if we'll cap it at that, we'll say it's not going to go above that because we're confident that we can. Litigation is, by its very nature, the opposite of that, in the sense of you have no idea where it's going to go, because you're not just your opponent, and there may be more than one opponent. You don't know what they're going to do, and generally they're not going to tell you or flag it to you that they're going to do X, Y, Z. And also the court is a creature in the whole process as well, and they sometimes can throw a massive curveball at you. And so you are unable to price it on a fixed fee basis. And what you're saying to your client is actually, you're going to have to pay me what I tell you it's going to take in terms of time. And I'm only going to really tell you, I'm going to try and predict how much time it's going to take me, but I'm really only going to be able to tell you how much time it's taken me after it's taken me that time. And their face will drop, and I say, well, now I'm going to say that's VUCA. That is the situation of litigation. And some people are able to choose to litigate, and other people's, as I said, receive it on their doorstep unexpectedly sometimes. And it's quite a frightful thing if you think about it.
I wanted to come back to the point about vulnerability, because all of that volatility and uncertainty and complexity that's probably really stoking the fire of people being at their most vulnerable and sensitive. How does that work inside your litigation team? So if we accept all of the complexity and volatility going on around you, do you lean into the vulnerability? Is vulnerability something that you therefore kind of almost you're mirroring in your team, or is it something you have to counterbalance? How do you manage that degree of vulnerability and honesty with your solicitors?
Well, I mean, there's a stock answer.
Get the stock answer out of the way,
Okay,
then
I'll
let's get
get
to
the
the good
stock
answer.
Yeah, the stock answer is that you try and avoid leaning into it. You maintain your impartiality, you divorce yourself from what is happening to the client, and you deal with the cold hard facts and the reality, because that's how you're going to best advise your client, because you're going to come at it without any of that. But the reality is that or the litigators that I know and respect live and breathe what happens to their clients. And to the extent that it's, to some extent with some people, it's, unhealthy. It's literally driving them mad. I'm somewhere in between, because and I try and impress this upon my teams in terms of the junior part of it, is that you can't um, you can't do the job properly if you're in the trenches with the client. You really have to be ordering them over the top, because it's if you get involved too much in what the client's thinking, you can lose perspective, and you can make poor decisions for the client. You can say we should do this when actually we should not do that. So it's about, I think, one of the traits that I have, which is, I think, helpful to this kind of thing, and I've learned it from others around me, it's not something that I had intrinsically, was that clients, or the relationship between client and lawyer, is that the lawyer should be on tap but never on top. It's got to be the client's issue. It's got to be their fight. It's got to be there, and you should be there ready for the the advice, ready for the putting the case, whatever it is. But you cannot be there to make the decisions. And as soon as you recognize that you've stepped over that, that's bad. And one of my supervisors, when I was a very junior lawyer, said, and this was the way that I managed to kind of articulate it in my head to myself about how the client should always be on top, is that the last communication on your file, and we used to have paper files in those days, so literally the last one, and solicitor order is always reverse chronology, so the most recent thing you'd be on the top, should be a communication to the client as to what has just happened, whatever it is. So as long as if you open the file, the last thing you see is a email to the client which said, we did this. If the last thing on the file was a letter to your opponent saying, we're going to shoot you down, then there's something's gone wrong there, because that's become your case rather than your client's.
It's really interesting you went to communication there, and actually that stack of the log, the detail that you keep throughout the case, because I wanted to ask a question very specifically about what communication looks like in the team. And I know earlier you said that you didn't want to bore us with boring things. This might sound like a boring question, but the mechanism by which the goal of the team is shared with the team. So you have a team that maybe they're working in complex multi-team systems. They're working for you on your case for that particular client. Communicating the point of what they're working on? What are the mechanisms, the cadences of communication that you have within the team to keep everybody aligned?
So again, it is horses for courses. So there's no one for all. It's so I have the largest team I have on the case at the moment, talking in terms of my own office rather than other offices around the firm, is a four-person team. So there's me and 3 other lawyers working on the case pretty much permanently. There are other lawyers that come in and out at periodic points in time, and the way we manage it, and it's interesting. It's well, this is interesting to me, and obviously I hope it's interesting to you. Is that we meet 2 o'clock on a Monday every week, and then we meet with the client every week on a Tuesday, and we have a an action list. It's not a spreadsheet because lawyers don't do spreadsheets; they do Word documents. So it's a Word document, and we review it. And there will be different parts of that team who have responsibilities for different things, but we all contribute to that meeting. And everybody who comes to that meeting, there's something wrong if they haven't got an action point that comes out of that meeting. That's quite an important thing from the justification for the team. However, we sat down actually yesterday on this team and recognized that we didn't have enough of that in our team at the moment. We've got some deadlines coming up, and there's a couple of issues, and also there is the fact that people are going off on longer periods of leave over the Christmas period, as they should do. And so we're like, okay, we need to up this. So we've now got a Monday, a Tuesday, and a Thursday meeting, and it literally is we're all in the office, but now we're conducting it on Teams because we then all have access to our documents or whatever. So it's literally that, and it's half an hour. We call them stand-ups, but we never stand up, and we have that communication. And that is probably pretty standard. It's not very exciting, but it's pretty standard as to how bigger teams work. Other than that, I probably on most of my other cases, I've got 2 or 3 lawyers working with me. 2 lawyers working with me, and we do that, but we do it more sporadically. It doesn't have the same need to meet regularly, but we do always run, action lists on my cases, because otherwise I lose track of what we're doing, and that's what the basis of communication with the team is. There are sidebars, and what you have to be careful about with the sidebars is that they are genuinely about that person's work stream, because sidebars, when they are team related stuff, can become problematic. You have a one-to-one conversation with somebody, and somebody's like, well, am I involved, am I not involved? And the whole politics of the CC line is enormous in terms of law firms, who's on it, who's dropped off it, because at least in principle, if you receive an email, even as a copy to you, that's you receiving an email, reviewing it, and logging time on the system to say that should be charged to the client. Now, is that justified for all the people who might be on the CC line? So you have to manage that. So yeah, it's organic and not, I wouldn't say very sophisticated, but it is not at all, for me, done by written communications. That the team stuff is mostly done by oral communications.
So there's quite a separation then, naturally, because of the nature of the work, that there are certain types of communication that essentially represent work that you're charging for. So that, like you say, the politics of the CC address bar, and then there's the working on the team rather than working in the team seems to be something that you're doing face to face. And I'm thinking of your reference to the emerging to-do list. It made me think of the ship of Theseus, like you're kind of building your ship while you're at sea, that everything's ever evolving. Is a lot of the work that you do in developing your team, your junior lawyers, is that done on the job, or will you spend time going, hey, let's reflect on how we do this? Do you do periods of that?
So it's funny. I had a trial in May, and I, at my age and stage, I don't get any feedback. No one tells me, good or bad, what I'm doing. But I was like, okay, we've come to the end of this case on this trial. I want I want to have proper feedback. And I stupidly thought that, if I just got everybody in the meeting, they would tell me what they thought about me, right? And so I got the team of 3 into a meeting and said, "Can I have some feedback?" And they were totally not able to provide it. And I then said, "Right, I'll get somebody else. Go and third party, go and collect feedback from what it's like to work with me." And I think from that point of view, I think people have said about my style is that it is actually the off-screen interactions that have really helped in terms of building their confidence as lawyers. It's the stuff that's not about the case that we're doing. It's the stuff that's not about the politics in the firm. It's about the stuff that's, like, I have a rule, a general rule, which I try to employ, which is the first 30 seconds of any Teams call particularly, but I'll do it in meetings as well, should not be anything to do with whatever's happening in the meeting. You do not start a meeting with what you're going to talk about at the meeting. You start it with, I really try and avoid the weather. I try to say something about food generally, or something humorous, and just before anything else. And I think that those are the interactions which people have identified as being, valuable. The breakouts, the release of tension, whatever it is that's valuable to working in teams that I'm involved in.
These are the subtle, small aspects that you introduce to the way that you work that are directly towards building the team, working on the team, as opposed to just getting the tasks completed.
Yeah, and I think that I have another rule of thumb, which is, generally, there are obviously deadlines, which you have no choice but to be 100% committed to whatever the deadline is that you need to achieve. But the rest of the time, you should be 20/80. You should be like, there should be a light and shade about it. You shouldn't have 100% of your time is dedicated to whatever the task is.
It's very clear that you really care about the relationship with the team. And at some point in your career, you will have decided, as we reflected on at the beginning, there are solicitors and there are barristers. You have chosen a very specific type of law. You've decided a very specific type of practice. It seems you've chosen the one that has the highest dependence on the team around you.
But I'm a massive team player. I'm a much better team player than I am any kind of leader or partner. I have been, and I suppose, there were, I get the science of it a bit, that, you can lead by not being, the number one person. You can lead by being the number 2 or number 3, or you can lead by being, the person who is actually doing all the work, who doesn't get any of the airtime. And I think my huge value is in being a part of the team and not being a leader of it. And that I get the most amount of satisfaction when I realize that my role is, dwindling in significance down to signing the bills or the letters out. That is massively a real a boost to me as somebody who's worked in this area. So yeah, so I couldn't. You can't, if you're a lone ranger, as I like to talk about the barrister side of the profession, if you're a lone ranger like that, you can never be part of a team in the same way. You can be a leader, like you can be a leader of a team, like you can, there's, examples of it across our business where they're very happy to, be at the, not in the weeds with the case or with the client or whatever. They're just leading the strategy and being the person, who has, consulted on certain things. But you can never, I don't think, be a real team player unless you're happy to follow and be not as good as the next person.
I would say that what you're describing, certainly to me, sounds a lot like a phenomena that some people call servant leadership, which is you can have the out there, very outgoing, potentially egocentric, narcissistic leadership, which sometimes is appropriate. But servant leadership is really all about empowering the team.
I was going to tell you an anecdote because I am my nickname is Anecdotal Hannah. Yeah. So, but the anecdote I tell, and I told this at the anecdote is a funny story because I told exactly this description. I did it was for a junior they weren't even lawyers. I think they were at school. I can't remember. They were very young. People who were interested in the legal profession, either because they just started or that they were about to go into it, and saying, what my career was like. It was a very easy, just talk about yourself situation. And somebody asked me the question, are you, the lead? What's your role? Are you the leader of the team or something like that? So I'm definitely not the leader. And said, in fact, I'm like the third person in the Conga. And they're like, what's that? And I had developed this whole thing around the Conga, which is that the first person in the Conga is the titular leader. They're completely irrelevant. They have no idea what's going to happen. Somebody just grabs them from behind. Yeah. So you do know what I'm talking about, the Conga, right? I'm not going to have to. Okay. So you're on the dance floor.
We're party.
You're there. You're in party.
Situation.
Your party situation, and the titular leader, irrelevant who they are, gets grabbed from behind by the leader, the person who is going to say, "We're doing a Conga. Everybody get on board. This is what is happening at this party."
It's only a Conga once the person behind has decided it's a Conga.
Actually, it's only a Conga when the third person joins, because if it's just two people dancing, and they look stupid because there's one standing behind the other. But when the third person joins, then that's the Conga. And then presumably the fourth, fifth, and sixth. But it was just really because I didn't want anybody to think that you can't be leading from behind. Second, third, whatever. You can still be leadership. But you can also sometimes you can also not have necessarily respect for the leader. That might be they're just, they're fronting the case. They're presenting in the meeting that you're in, but actually you recognize that the leadership behind that particular meeting or that presentation or that pitch to that client or that presentation in court has actually been done by two or three other people, maybe further down the Conga. But there's a funny story is that I got to the end of this anecdote and the group of people said, "What's a Conga?" So
yeah, I'm glad you checked with us.
Yeah.
Halfway through the story.
What do you think it was that was stopping people from giving you feedback then, as the person who's the leader? What do you think made those younger lawyers nervous?
Some people say that I'm got high EQ. Other people say I am a bit like I miss things completely. And on this occasion, I think I completely missed the fact that no one was going to want, however much I think I'm super accessible and super nice and lovely and everybody thinks I'm great, they were not going to give me feedback to my face. Just the reality, people. I mean, I do work with colleagues who will give me feedback to my face, but these were quite junior and they just weren't. They just wanted to say nice things about me and how great it had been working on the case. And I was like, well, that's great, but it's not very helpful. So I think it was just that. I was just naive to think that people would say, potentially critical things to me. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I always have a sort of inflated expectation as to what people might be prepared to say to others. I mean, it's one of the features of our business that people generally sidestep difficult conversations anyway.
There's obviously a dominance of the client relationship dynamic in your profession. You even mentioned earlier, I'm a bit like the client to some of my junior solicitors. So you see that relationship in areas of your work beyond when there is actually a client there. And does that influence just how people behave generally as lawyers?
Oh, so you mean the sort of the deferential nature of their interactions? As we grow up in a law firm, private practice, you are schooled in terms of your, the importance of the interactions with your client, and there's also the regulated side of it as well. So that level of making sure that the client is paramount in everything you do. I suppose that I guess infects everything. The relationships within the team as well. That's just because the nature of how we learn to produce work and serve our clients.
Is there a positive side as well, though? Is it that ability to be deferential surely means you're very good at looking for what other people need anticipating, coordinating with them. Do you see that as well, like the benefits of it?
That is definitely what the best team players, in terms of, if you're talking about now working on a case, is exactly that. You will treat your more seniors as the client. You will anticipate their every need, and you will communicate clearly and in a cost efficient way. That's it. You've got that's the secret sauce. If you've got that, then basically the litigation and whatever the court might have to say about what you're trying to engage in is almost irrelevant.
Okay, so Hannah, we like to finish our conversations with a few quick fires. So I'd like to start by asking you what your best team memory is.
Well, it's quite hard to nail it down, but results for clients when you've done it as part of a team are massive in terms of your feeling towards the team, client team, counsel team, and your colleagues. And I can think of recent moments when it's a horrible feeling, but you get the judgment from the court and you have to open it. You generally have to scroll to the bottom of a very long document to find out what the outcome has been. But the moment when you do that and then you're able to share it with your team and share that success, I can think of several instances when that has felt really good. And I 100% know, if I had been engaged in that process on my own, the feeling of excitement and the feeling of joy and the feeling of achievement would be nothing. It would be a speck in comparison to what it is to share it with other people. But I have also had a very, probably in some ways, extreme or unique experience in the recent past, because I left a firm that I've been working at for 20 plus years in December 21, in circumstances when I never thought I would leave that firm. I thought I had been born there and I was going to professionally die there. And they were looking to list as a law firm. And for my bit of the business and for my team of partners, that was something that was a bit alien to us. And so we took a decision to leave the firm as a group of partners. And the firm Mishcons that we were leaving were extremely grown up about it, and said, well, of course you should leave this. This isn't what you want. This is the direction the firm is traveling, and if you're not with us, then you should go. And so they had agreed to release us from some key covenants in relation to our practices. But they did not release us in relation to our people covenants, which is the life and blood of law firms, is your restrictive covenants in relation to the personnel. And at that time we had a team of, I think, 18 lawyers. So it was 18 plus the 5 of us, and plus 2 support staff as well. And we were, quite rightly in relation to our covenants, prevented from talking to them at all about our decision and about our move, where we were intending to move to. But one by one, independently of us, because I was not allowed to speak to anybody, one of the partners was able to have a release to speak to some of the junior members. But one by one, they found out where we were going, approached the firm, Greenberg as it was, and one by one joined us. So we left with a team of 22 people from our previous firm, which I think is pretty unique. But I felt it was a validation of a team that we had spent a long time building. And that if we hadn't put the hours into actually recruiting the right people, developing them, and making them feel that they were, even in the hierarchy, as valued as every other member in the team, which is definitely the goal, they wouldn't have come.
Going the other side then, do you have any team red flags?
I think there is, in terms of the environment in which I work, high pressure, all of that. The mood hoovers, I have no time for. You have
Mood
to,
hoovers.
yeah.
Vibe killers.
Vibe killers. People generally who don't see the funny side of whatever it is, because there's always a funny side, and humor is undervalued in my view in terms of business. It's a glue for me in my life of, it keeps me sane in my, domestic as well as my professional life. And I think that anybody who's not prepared to laugh at themselves or the situation that they find themselves in, or sometimes the situation a client finds themselves in, however serious it is, if you can't find the chink of humor in it, it's quite damaging to the team and to the project you're involved in.
And that's it for today's episode with the wonderful Hannah Blom-Cooper. Hannah's Pass It On resources were a recommendation you didn't hear in the episode to check out an interview between Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant discussing Adam's book, Hidden Potential, The Science of Achieving Greater Things. You can hear that interview on Malcolm's podcast, Revisionist History. As always, you can find links to our guests and the Pass It On resources in the show notes, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of Teamcraft.